Hey there guys, and welcome back. So as usual, we have the GitHub page. I got a good bit done today. I actually liked the amount we got done. A lot of it was preparation. Like, we obviously had to get, well, here you can see like half a page of just dev notes, but we got a lot of stuff set up, so that was great progress. And otherwise, yeah, I guess we'll just dive right into it. So kick you over to the VS Code, and I will stay on GitHub myself. So first big change is equipment. Equipment got renamed to items because I started adding resources in here. So this is the items.json. Obviously, as you see here, we got a couple resources, and we added the transport. One of those things. Equipment transport kind of still falls within the realm of equipment, but the second we start adding resources, that doesn't really. Down here, this is items.js. This used to be equipment. Had to update everything that referred to equipment, so that's going to be a number of the changes. And I added this stackables class. I talked about this in the last video. I think it was the last video. Back to, there's certain things that have weight, have quantities, and therefore we could make a subclass. I didn't add it to the weapon class down here. I could have added to a weapon class down here and just done something to lock it to one quantity, but I decided not to because weapons are not stackable to begin with. So at least, so in a dark room they are, but because we're going with weapon loadouts in this game, then I am not making them stackable. So if this was a dark room, more like a dark room, then they would be stackable. They actually would fall into this category. But because I want to do a weapons loadout system, that is not going to be the case. Otherwise, let me refer to my notes here. Yeah, so item got extended to be stackable, which means that we moved quantity and item type.weight into the super method here. No big deal. And then obviously we've added resource type and resource, the objects from last time, not transport. Right now, these are just very, very cut and dry. There's almost not a reason to have these as two separate classes, but because that's the way I've designed the rest of the program, that is why we are doing it like that, just to keep the code base consistent. Next up, I guess I will just touch on back to .json. We looked at, this no longer exists right here, but we looked at items.json and saw these two items in here, and obviously over here in English, we're going to have some names for those. So provisions, which are food. Again, I wanted the colony, which is what I'm calling home base, so your village in a dark room. I didn't like the fact that you could take everybody off of productive work and just stack them all on something just to get a lot of something really quick with no penalties, no need to balance what you're doing. You legitimately can just leave the game up for a full day on each and every item type and eventually max up each and every item type without having to worry about, balancing the needs of the village. Everybody can just go hungry and never die of starvation or anything like that. I didn't particularly like that mechanic, so we've added in food for the people. And then these batteries are, I'm thinking, the main resource, kind of like wood. However, I'm not so sure. It's one of these things with wood, all right? It made sense when you got wood and then you built houses and whatnot. So maybe this should be scrap. My only problem with it being scrap is then we are using it to fuel our base. Fueling our base is what I'm calling fueling the fire in a dark room to keep that analog going. So instead of putting logs on the fire, putting wood on the fire, you instead put batteries into the base's power system, and that keeps it running. That was my idea originally, but obviously we can't then take the battery and make a house out of it. Doesn't make very much sense. However, what we could do is we could say, you need this many more batteries to power another room in the colony. So there are spare rooms. You need to power the spare rooms to keep them, vacuum sealed and airtight, whatever it is, and powered and warm and not freezing and whatnot. So we do have an excuse for that. It just, basically the colony is fully built in theory, with the exception of add-ons, but I'll get that at. and then you're using batteries to get those other things, online. So that is an explanation that would go with the theme. However, I'm not entirely sure about it right now. Let's look at what's changed again. Just so in IO, we just had some changes to equipment to items, and in game the same exact thing. Demos the same exact thing. Combat the same exact thing. And then so now I will hop over to Homebase. Homebase.js. This is a brand new file, and we created the colony, as you can see here. I'm going to use this for unlocks. So basically, the game had, it seems like, flags. So when you cleared a dungeon, which was the coal mine, then it kind of flagged it. It felt like, to me at any rate, it basically put up a flag that said, okay, now you can mine coal. So that's, for right now, what I'm doing with this right here. This max power level is the battery level, or in other words, our wood level. So the room is hot, is the highest level in a dark room. In theory, 10, I guess. One of the things, just the number that I picked out, 10 being a good solid round number. For all I know, it was 7 or 8 in a dark room, but it doesn't necessarily matter. Once you get the fire going, then it's just a matter of time, right? We'll come back to hunger rate in a minute when we get down to Meeple. So in the colony, we have a reference back to the game, because it seems to me like it's going to be necessary to get all the references we need. That may be inaccurate. We may not need all those references. We may be able to just pass in a couple more things and be done with it. We'll change this if necessary. Power level is obviously, as I stated, the wood level inside of your fire, basically, the fire level. Unlocks we've already gone over. Resources is your stack of resources, so wood, steel, etc. in a dark room. This would be the same thing, scales, etc. So that is your stack of resources. I do not have this ordered or as an object. I had it like that at first, and rather than, so I'm kind of the opinion, it's a little difficult. I don't mind with resources because the resource screen is a relatively slow and laid back screen. I don't mind resources disappearing off the list when you don't have any of them, in order to keep it less cluttered. So that's my argument there. It keeps the resource list less covered because there are so many resources when you run out to just remove them, and therefore that's why I have it as an array, opposed to an object which contains all possible resources and then just resources that are at 0. That is one other option, and we can change it to that in the future if we want to, but I don't know that it's necessary. And then, as alluded to, Meeples. Meeples are just the citizens of the colony. That's just what I'm calling them on the back end. We will not be calling them Meeples in the future. On the front end, rather. The end user, the player, will not see the word Meeples. That is just me, treating them as the little tokens that they are, that go on the game board. So right here we have a very simple utility function just to get a resource out of the stack by its ID, because again, the stack is unsorted, which is something that we probably should fix. I probably should, or at the very least on the front end, sort it on the front end. That's a good possibility that we just do that rather than keeping the array sorted on the back end. But this obviously just lets us go in and get a resource by ID unless it's not there, in which case null. I started this update loop. This was the very last thing that I started doing, and that, as you can see, updates the people in the colony and collects from. And then this is 2 updates on the people, just again a top level for the colony. So let's start talking about this stuff, right? There were much more simpler ways to do this, okay? But if you haven't picked up on it, I am very much an object-oriented person, so it ended up as an object. And part of the reason why it ended up as an object rather than just little pips going into ability scores, basically, is because it seems to me from memory, playing a dark room, that you did not get all your resources all at once. So let's say that I was getting 5 wood every 10 seconds in the game because of the number of gatherers I had on it, right? If I added another gatherer to get us up to 6 wood per second, per 5 seconds, if I did that at the 4-second mark, I did not then get 6 wood. I would get, 3 or 4 wood within the next 1 or 2 seconds, and then maybe another 2 wood because I added the meeple. I increased the number of points I had in gather wood at different points. And therefore, each of these individual citizens who are doing the gathering kind of need to track their own progress on gathering new materials, which is why I made them an object, because then it's easier for me to just say, hey, each individual person, figure out where the heck you're at and whether or not you've collected anything. And that's what all this is. The hunger, we'll go ahead and cover hunger. Again, this is the stat that I wanted to add in order to make it so you could not exploit your workers and make them not eat in order to gather a whole bunch of iron and stack up iron immediately. One of those things, I don't even know that it's a bit of a player preference. It's just, it doesn't make any sense to me. The original rulings, the original way the game was set out, the original design decisions, it didn't make sense from a theme perspective either. It was not thematic because a dark room is kind of this stark post-apocalyptic scenario, and therefore, because it's a post-apocalyptic scenario, survival and eating is kind of a major theme in those stories. Gathering food and resources in order to not die to the elements or to zombies or whatever. That is a major theme of those stories, and it was completely ignored in that game, and I felt that was a little overlooked. Honestly, mostly because it's a resource gathering game. If it wasn't a resource gathering game, if this was a hack and slash game, then I wouldn't worry so much about random citizens eating. We could just assume off screen they're finding food to eat. But because this is specifically a game about gathering resources and building up a town, city building, it makes significantly less sense to not include that thematic element to me, which is why it's in here. So, how I decide to do these two things, we're going to go ahead and scroll down to that big block of text that I pointed out on the GitHub screen. So, when we are gathering, the meeple starts gathering at a specific time, and each time it overcomes a certain amount of milliseconds, it gathers more material. So, for example, if wood, as we say here, or actually this has batteries in here. So, if charging battery takes 800 seconds, every 800 seconds after the time they start, so in this example, 1,000 seconds, they will gather a battery. So at 1,800 milliseconds, they will have gathered a battery. So we need the start time in order to calculate that. We could, once they gather the battery, then set a new start time. I am opting not to do that. That is valid. However, I'm opting not to do that just because then we're constantly rewriting that variable. There's also this is a very minor thing. I don't think it's going to go into the game because it's just mechanics inflation. It's just, again, back to this being a minimalist game, quote unquote. I don't know what exact minimalist means. So I feel like maybe me adding this feature that I'm about to outline might be going past the minimalist idea. However, in theory, what you could do is you could keep track of everything a person has, a meeple, a citizen has gathered, and every single time they've eaten, and then you could display that as a statistic. So we could say John has died. John, while he was alive, gathered 8,000 batteries for you, 300 scrap, and he lived for 30 days. We could do stuff like that. That's really interesting, and I really like that idea. It's just I don't know if that's taking it past the point of minimalism. I think that might be adding too much to the game scenario, so that's why I've not added it, but I'm keeping some potential for it in here by using these mechanics again, rather than resetting the timer each time you gather from the meeple. Every time the meeple produces a new resource, we could just, again, reset the timer, set a new start time on the timer. But instead, we're doing it this way. The other nice thing about this is, as you can see from down here in the notes, by having the start time determined, we then can end up with a remainder when we go to save the game. And then it's very simple to take that remainder, as it says here, and deduct it from the start time that the meeple would have gotten the next when we start the game up. So when we start the game up, as it says right here, if 500 milliseconds is when the meeple was created when we start up the game, and it was 112 milliseconds into its next battery gather, well, then it's very, very simple. It's very straightforward to just subtract that off and just start from 388 instead of 500. Even if this was 50 right here, I should have picked a better number. So even if this was 100 right here, then we could still set the job start time as -12. It is no problem for the job start time to be negative, to be below 0, and it would not screw up our code at all. If we were not keeping track of the job start time start to finish, then we could end up with a situation where it's got 112 milliseconds left, and the first job start time is, well, how was I going to say this? It made more sense in my head. I'm actually going to stop myself there. Anyway, it's very simple to do it this way. Let me stop myself there because I think I was about to say something really stupid, and that was not a great tangent to go on. So, right now, both collecting and hunger work the same exact way because they're both effectively timers, okay? And I am very, very tempted to just turn these into a timer class, to just have a timer class that manages start time, a collection rate, collection flags, etc., because it's repeated code, right? So it would save me having the repeated code. As you can see all the way down here, I actually combined it, and we're just passing a property to get in each of these in order to combine these functions because they're effectively the same function. And even then, fact of the matter is that, as you can see here, I could delete this second line, move this down, okay? Let's just do that really quick. So I can move this down and then say item time equals this dot job dot collection time, okay? And right here, item time equals this dot hunger start. Actually, no, that would just be hunger here. Equals hunger rate. There we go. And then item time right here. So we could even pare it down even more and make it turn into this. This would be cleaner code. And it's honestly something I probably should do. This was one of the last things I did on this past session, so I didn't have much time to think about it. I just got it in there really quick. The changeover. Originally, I was going to have hunger work differently, but I decided that it just made more sense to have it work exactly like collection time. So I changed my mind, backtracked, and redid hunger really quick at the end there. And as you can see, I didn't even combine these two. So again, these two are similar functions. They, you have a hunger flag you set if it's hungry, you have a collection flag it sets if it's finished collecting, and you update the hungers with the collections, etc., etc., etc. So again, this right here also is repeated code, and this right here, along with all this stuff down here, could just get put into a function, into a class that manages it, and we just called it, this dot collection equals new timer, etc., 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 and then this dot hunger equals new timer, etc., etc. We could do something like this. This would save us a bit of space. I mean, it would make the code cleaner, in my opinion. One of those things, though, because I recognize that I have an addiction to object-oriented programming, I am holding off for the moment. So that is that. So Meeples can collect things. They can indicate that they have finished collecting an object so that the colony then can take the object off of their hands and deduct the required resources. So I did not get the chance to, oh no, I did. Excellent. Okay, I forgot. Yes, I did really quick slap together jobs. So jobs have required resources, generated resources, required resources, and a collection time. So this is more or less exactly like a dark room where, it might cost 5 wood and 5 meat in order to create 1 cured meat, for example. So that was 2 requirements in the resources required, 1 generated requirement, 1 generated resource, and a collection time. And over here in in English, I don't think I did. Yes, okay. So I added these in English. So grow food and charge batteries for our 2 resources we have so far. And up here in jobs, there we go. In jobs.json, I have started working on jobs. One of these things where there's no real, so we do have multiple files here, okay, which we will have to serve off the server individually, but at the same time, it makes less sense to stick them together, and like just from an organizational standpoint. From a serving standpoint, then honestly, especially because as a JSON, a properly formatted JSON file, this should have its own header right here. You know, this really makes no difference to anybody else other than me programming it if this goes right here, right? So in theory, this would work out just fine. The program wouldn't particularly care, and etc. But for my sake, for organization's sake, to make it look cleaner, we do have these in 2 separate files right now. And let's take a quick look back at GitHub. Boom. Did I miss anything on GitHub? I don't think so. Oh, okay. So I see the unlocks again as I'm scrolling through here. One thing I would like to say about that one is it wasn't until I started writing that I realized, and I hesitate because I'm a little ashamed that I didn't realize this. I didn't consciously realize it. Maybe I did realize it on some level, but a darkroom puts you on Schrodinger's railroad. Which basically means that if I go north at the start of the game, which is what I did. Actually, I think I did south first. So I went south first, right? And I hit the coal mine. If I had not gone south first, had I gone north first, then I would have still hit the coal mine. That is the annoying part that I realized, is that I don't believe it was possible for me. I mean, it may have been possible, but so, for example, if I did not immediately enter and clear the coal mine and started doing more searching, there is a possibility that I then would have found the steel mine next, and then the whatever came after the steel mine, helium mine or whatever it was, oil mine, petroleum mine. You know, I would have found all these unlocks in order, even if I didn't clear the first one, but I would have came across them, you know, in the same exact order, regardless of the circuit I took around the base. So it's one of those things that is a bit annoying to me. It does make it a lot easier because fact of the matter is then you got to somehow gatekeep the player to stop them from getting to higher resource areas first. So, for example, if we decided that the steel mine was south instead of the coal mine, well, in theory, I don't get steel items before I get iron items because the iron items are lower value than the steel items, the lower stats, from a gameplay perspective, from a balance perspective. So in order to stop that from happening, we go ahead and make sure that the very first mine that I get to is the coal mine, or, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, one of those things was a bit annoyed at myself that I did not consciously observe that while I was playing the game. And I'm not 100% sure that I actually dislike that because, again, it is very useful. However, a player who knows about that, I don't know what exactly you do about it because it feels to me like the way the gameplay works, technically you could stack up enough materials and consumables to beat a higher level dungeon before a low level dungeon. So the fact that you're on Schrodinger's railroad doesn't actually matter because, for example, I could go south, not go into the coal mine, and then go east and hit the steel. I mean, I think it was technically coal mine, iron mine, steel mine. I want to say that's what it was. So I'm getting these a little bit out of order, but I could hit a higher level resource, I believe, if I went and played the game again from the start before I cleared the first one, I believe, unless the only alternative is that, the bridge is out. You see this mine over here, but the bridge is out. You put triggers in there like that, then okay, I guess that works. But yeah, it's one of these things going forward. The reason I bring this up is it is a design decision we have to make. So we will make that in the future. And otherwise, yep, that is everything I have for you today. So, yeah, just going to continue doing what we're doing here. Again, might decide that these really should be their own classes to handle the whole entire timer situation. It's not ridiculous, necessarily speaking, especially because I've already abstracted out all this stuff to begin with. So it's not out of character, but I don't know. I'm trying to hold myself back here. Otherwise, like I said, we will next up. So let's see. We technically have resources working. I kind of need to actually get the colony, like the colony at this point, at the update collections, update hunger. Right after that, then it has to, check for collected flags, meeple.collect collection flag, collect flag. It has to check for that first. And then if it's there, then it gets a new resource. So that's easy enough. So that will be done pretty quick. And then the hunger flag, if the hunger flag is true, then it's dead. So then we got to remove the meeple from the meeple list, which again does not take much work. So once those two very minor things are done in the next session, then I believe it's setting up your passive scaling, not passive scaling, but passive collection resources. Actually, I take it back. Those are not passive. Those are activated. This is passive. The meeples are passive. Basically your gather wood and your traps, those two things that you had in a dark room. Again, I would like to get more of that stuff in here because only having two of them was kind of lame in a dark room. Now, again, maybe that's a decision because minimalist, etc., etc., etc. However, there are other areas that are a bit more obtuse, in my opinion, a little bit more developed, so I don't see why not. So, for example, the resource list and the number of jobs that your meeples can have in a dark room is significantly longer than the number of activated gathering abilities that you have, which suggests to me that would be overdeveloped. The resource gathering for the citizens would be overdeveloped if the argument is that we can't have more activated gathering abilities because it would be too complicated. So I don't really think that was a valid argument if it was, and therefore we can add more of them in our game because I feel justified. So yeah, that should be next. And after that, I keep on saying, so every single time we talk about the future, I keep on saying events. Events will be next. Events will be next after that. We'll see what actually ends up being next because there are other things to consider, but it may just be events. Well, I guess there is also stuff like base statistics. So, for example, number of population, your population cap, rather, is a better way of saying it. Implementing a population cap would be a valid next thing to work on otherwise, but maybe eventually we get to events as I keep on teasing it. So, that is everything. I was not attempting to stretch that out for the full 30 minutes. And just to prove that, I'm going to finish up the intro in the next 50 seconds so that we're in under 30 minutes. So, as always, I hope you have a great, wonderful day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're in the world. Look forward to the next session, session number 8. And thank you for watching. I did all of that exactly out of order, and that's all right because we're still done in less than 30 minutes. So there.